welcome everyone. I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. And this is November 26th. That's, I don't know what, I'm not sure if it's 6 o'clock or how close we are for time, 6:08.
Not bad.
Not bad. And we will start our meeting. Does everyone have an agenda? And you probably heard me just say, I had asked Brian to make copies of all these minutes for us.
Well, we do not have minutes.
We don't have what?
Is the meeting actually open yet?
Yes,
Okay.
this meeting is open, yes.
Okay, I have been in communication about the minutes.
Mhm.
We do not have new minutes for the evening. We're going to table this item. I have not seen drafts of the latter two for October 1st or October 15th, so Ryan expects to have the preliminary drafts of those two within the next day or two. There was, as you know, some confusion about the September 17th minutes, which I was under the impression had been finalized in my absence, and
Yeah.
turns out apparently not.
No.
So I have Ryan chasing those down too, because I do have a draft of those from him.
He has sent me all those 3 minutes. He has sent me copies of those minutes, and I look at them and I send them back to him. And then supposedly he should send it to you. I don't know why he's just
Well,
finalizing them now.
maybe he mistyped an address or something, but I did not got any except the first two. And my impression had been from our last meeting, seriously, that that had already been taken care of. So,
And this was weeks ago, then.
well, you know, there are committees that are getting minutes from their paid staff that are a year old now. As long as we get them caught up in the next week or two, I'm not going to be hysterical about this.
So you've seen the minutes for 9/17 and
I've seen
October.
preliminary minutes from the what I had not seen were what I believed existed, which were finalized minutes that I had not prepared, that I believed from a previous meeting had been voted on in my absence, at which point I thought I had said, great, fine, you voted, it's done, and
Well,
apparently,
if we had the minutes from your last meeting, we would know what
well,
minutes.
we wouldn't necessarily know, because a great deal of detail gets lost when you do this.
Okay.
If I had gone back 4 days ago and begun listening to all the recordings, then we would know, but I did not do that.
Okay.
So
All right.
it is as much me as it is Ryan. I did not push him on this. If the drafts exist and I
I
just
did,
didn't see
but-
them, you know, maybe the thing to do is just for you to forward what you have to.
Okay, well, we'll just have to table that if it's okay with everyone.
Madam Chairman, we had a tape recorder.
Mhm.
Would that be helpful if we brought it back and taped it? It just gives the tape,
That sounds like you.
It would,
the audio?
well, presumably we have this on video someplace.
We do.
This is me rather than a lack of pure access.
Maybe-
I just did not, well, for weeks I didn't have time to go through the entire case. And today it was like, okay, I might have to do this, but it's not a good one, because that is very time consuming. As you know, I already tried to resign as secretary twice.
Don't try it again.
Are there extra agendas?
Are these the agendas? Are these yours?
No, they are being handed along.
If you have any extra.
Yeah, we can get them.
Yeah.
Did you get this?
This is
I
something
have,
else?
Okay.
this is a new grant of our groups, Tasha and
Can we wait a second? I just got a request. She would like us, all of us, she would like all of us to say our names before we, so if you want to start.
Marco Crescentini.
Mimi Patch.
Andrew McMahon.
Mike Falsetti.
Rosemary Arnold.
Chip Follow.
Libby Hernandez.
Amy Lando.
And then to,
Mike McGrath.
thank you for coming. And you're gonna
Yeah,
monitor
thank you.
us tonight and help us out here.
Thank you.
All right, great. Okay, so we're on to, did you want?
Make a motion to table item 1, Madam
Yes.
Chairman?
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. The next item on the agenda is treasurer's report. Andrew?
Yes. So what I have today for us is our budget article for fiscal year 19. Within the last 2 weeks, the state match became clear what it would be for this year. I made 3 copies. Amy, I think you may have made a few.
Yes.
So I can pass these around and you can all follow along. So the 2019 estimated collections was 45. That's what we've been discussing for the last 6 months. The fiscal year 19 state CPA match actually came in at $94,659. So I apportioned that down into the 5%, the 3 10% reserves, with the remaining in the overall budget reserve for a budget of this year at $579,659. This is what we would submit to the city council for approval before the tax rates are set.
Okay, go ahead.
Madam Chair, so the balance, it would be 579, the workable balance is 579,659?
For this year, fiscal year 19, yes.
So 485, oh, you don't, this doesn't include 2018.
No,
No, this is the.
we don't submit
Yeah.
that up.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
right, because we already submitted about
I,
it.
last,
2018.
two meetings ago, I showed that big spreadsheet. That
Yes,
shows
right.
both and what our overall balance is of $1 million and some change.
So this includes all the totals that we're supposed to,
Yes.
is this the same thing that you had to send to someone else, the state or something about?
No, those were forms, those are different, those are reporting structures. This is just that the city approves it before they set the tax rate. We did this last year.
Right.
The only addition for this year is that we have a state match this year.
Mhm.
There is an entire fiscal year 18 that we did not use,
Right,
with the 10% are still remaining in those accounts.
right,
And
okay.
I don't have that spreadsheet, it's actually in my car, but,
I have it here.
yeah, so we have the overall big picture as well,
Mhm.
yes.
Yes, yeah.
But this is what the council will be approving. I anticipate that we will collect more than 485, but this is a safe bet.
Mhm.
We don't want to ever budget for more.
Right, exactly. Okay, great.
So this, we are seeking approval of the committee to submit this for approval.
Mhm. Okay. Do I have, is there any questions? Do I have a motion to accept?
So moved?
Is there a second? Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andrew, for
Thank
that.
you.
And I hope they know what to do with this, because they forget what's what, you know?
I'll ask Mike to make sure it moves along.
Mm,
He actually helped us last year too.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, the next thing on the agenda is discussion on state amount received and how that will affect the overall budget. And the only reason I wanted to have that in there was because I want to know how much we have in addition to what we already had for administration, the 5%.
Yes. So I didn't get the up-to-date expenses of how much we've spent since the last 2 meetings.
Mhm.
I hope to have it by today. I can forward that for the next committee. I don't know the exact balance, but I'll have that next time.
But, so we should,
So our, it was about 23,000, I believe, or 24,000 we had, and now we're looking at almost 29,000 for administrative. So our administrative budget did go up.
Okay, so did you include the 5% from the 94,000 from the state?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so how much more is that? I'm just curious, because I'm
Yeah.
wondering about the balance.
It's about 6,000 more.
Isn't that for next year though?
No, that's for this year. We're 5 months into the fiscal year 19.
Right, we need that, Amy.
Oh, you
Don't
mean
say
This
this
is-
money
we've
goes into
supplemented.
the admin budget before June 30th?
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Yeah, good, we needed that.
Yeah, but
Yes.
No, it is a little plus up, so
Yes.
I will have a better report on that next meeting.
Yeah, okay, good,
Oh,
great.
that's really good. I didn't know.
That's very good.
Yes.
Holy cow, the Christmas present.
Well,
Yeah, you're not
so
kidding.
just for everybody's reference, the 94,000, we were expecting 2 meetings ago to be 56,000. So it's significantly more. The state
Mhm.
match came in higher than we anticipated.
Right,
Do we know why that is?
yes.
Yeah,
There's
A budget surplus.
yeah,
They added the legislation.
legislation did
So
it
it's
last
not
minute.
necessarily gonna continue
No.
in future years, but Governor Baker is for, continue, or, raising the tax so that, he thinks it should be a 50% match.
Which would be awesome.
Yeah.
Which would be fantastic.
So how much more will this make the admin budget then, did you say?
I don't have the exact, I think
Okay.
it's about 7,000 more than we were forecasting 2 CPAs ago.
What was the match percentage by the state?
I think 18%?
19, was
19?
19%, yeah.
And originally we were forecasting 11,
11.
so we did see more.
Yes, we did. That was great.
I also sent you an email, Andrew, but I don't know if I sent it. if
You did
saw
send it to me, I was looking at it, the
Oh.
differences.
Did you see that discrepancy?
Yeah, I fixed it on that sheet that I have,
Okay,
so.
so you have a more updated one?
I do.
Okay. Great.
Anything else for the treasurer? Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Good job.
Okay, next item on the agenda, discussion and vote on the addition to the rules regarding our application process. And Amy made copies for us, thank you, Amy, for that.
And
So
road
that-
rules.
And wrote the rules that, I think, how far does it go up to, conflicts of interest? I think it goes up to, 11, we originally already approved, but that was just for our own internal workings as a committee. And now we've added on information about the, actual, Application
on the
process.
cycle, and I had to change that and make, I had to make the amendment and revision, the last article, number 13, in order to put everything before it. So, because Article 13 says that these rules can be replaced or revised at any time, so it seemed like it made more sense for that to be the last article.
okay,
So there's really two that you have to vote on, really.
okay, all right. Very good, so, yes, so 12 and 13 are new, although 13 is at the end.
Well, 13 was voted in,
But
but
it's
it's just
voted
a
in, it's
different
at
order.
the end,
Yeah.
right, okay.
Yes.
The new information is 12. It basically comes from Tasha and Amy having looked through the East Hampton rules and pulled out the critical parts to just give us some rules about how our funding cycle works and ensure that we can hold applications over if necessary and ensure people that we can make exceptions if there's some sort of emergent circumstances that require us to go off fund cycle. So it doesn't go into details about how we will conduct our public hearings, which I think are probably unnecessary in any case. It is very likely that the law department and planning and economic development will be putting together extensive rules about conduct of public hearings that we can steal over the next month or two. But this does the last piece of it that I think we needed to do. And I'm grateful for both Amy and Tasha's
It
work
was
on
me,
this.
not Tasha.
Okay, well, just you. But I saw emails from her going by too.
Yeah, I was trying to, but it seemed like
But I think you nailed it, so.
she looked at it.
And at any rate, we have had an eye from the city solicitor's office on this.
Okay, did everybody have a chance to take a look at that? And see if there's anything else that we should add in there, or if any changes, that's good to me.
Madam Chairman, I have a question. Is it implied that when we approve this, it must by definition go to the city solicitor for his or her approval? Is that implied with any document in the city board?
The ordinance that sets up this committee does refer to rules and says that we can change them and that the city solicitor's office is supposed to read them and basically approve them. The city solicitor last time I looked was saying, yeah, fine, I'll take a look at them, but you shouldn't take this too seriously. It doesn't mean that you need to do a full review process and get my formal signature on everything. Of course, we've just lost our city solicitor and one of our assistant city solicitors. So Whether the new legal team, when we have one, will take the same relaxed view, we can't know. But that is in fact in the
That's
city ordinances.
It also says in the ordinance that we must, after we vote on this, give the city clerk's office a copy
Yeah.
of the rules. So we'll give the city clerk's office a copy, we'll give the city solicitor's office a copy, so they'll have it, and even the city council will give them a copy if they want. And plus, you know,
And
we
it
should
might
all have
have
one.
to go on the website too.
We could put it on the website, absolutely.
So who should get it, the city clerk's office and who else?
City solicitor,
Uh-huh.
city council,
Who would I send it to get it to the city council?
Right.
Ryan.
Okay.
And then, we should put one in the binder, our binder.
Oh, yeah, that's
In the
right.
binder after vote. First we have to vote on it and make it, make sure that everyone's in agreement with our rules. We finally did it. It's done. City of Hoyoke rules. Okay, so do I have a motion to
Well,
accept?
can I just ask
Oh,
two
sure.
quick questions before we do
Yes,
that? Not to hold things up, but,
Yeah.
so the last sentence of the Article 12, the committee shall have the option to exercise flexibility for unforeseen time-sensitive situations.
Mhm.
In regards to the entire
In regards,
process, I'm just trying to understand what that means.
in regards to the application and funding cycles, but certainly, if we wanted to.
So if we want to extend deadlines for applications, we have the flexibility to do that. If it's due on Thursday, we can.
No, that's not what that means.
So I'm asking, what does it mean?
I can explain what it means.
Yes.
Go for it.
Because it's also in the plan, the CPA plan. It means that if there is some sudden, circumstances, like there's some emergency situation, that you would, as the committee, you could decide even outside the funding cycle to do that, or give more time for an application or whatever it is. So it's more of like,
Okay,
from what I understand, more of an unusual situation that really would benefit the city, and it can't be done later. It has to be done at that time.
In a general sense, we should not, once we publicize what the dates are, we should never extend the deadline unless it was an emergency situation.
okay. Like a snowstorm or something.
I don't know.
Guess that's
I can't even
unforeseen,
think
right?
what it could be, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean-
no.
I mean, I know a
Oh,
project, I
yeah.
understand, see, this is
I
what
mean, in
this,
terms of the project, like if the
Yeah.
project,
I mean, I
something
understand
comes
if
up.
something comes up, like, let's just say a piece of critical property
Mhm.
becomes available and
Right.
it's outside the cycle, but it needs to move
Right.
fast, that allows us to
Exactly.
do that.
That's what
But
But what I'm asking about is projects that are coming during the normal funding cycle. We have, the committee shall have the option to exercise flexibility.
No, we should not, that's my opinion, only because we did have some people try to get in after the date and, in time, and we said no. So we have to be firm with that. If it's just a regular project that's coming in, once we say the date and time, we have to be firm with that. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it's not
up to
based
you
on
guys.
It's not, the
somebody didn't
intent
get
isn't
around.
to extend deadlines to provide for other, okay.
Except
I was
that,
trying to
I would
understand.
think that there is some desirability to having the flexibility. I mean, not that I would want to exercise it routinely,
Right,
but if
with
there
you.
is some sort of emergency, if, for instance, an application, we have, say, voted to move something forward, and its merits depend on a bunch of expert opinions, and we haven't heard from the experts. And the hearing where we will hear from the relevant expert, say an art conservator who can tell us whether something is authentic or not. It's tonight, and we hear that the conservator in question has had a heart attack and is currently in Bay State, and they're expected to be fine, but there's no way they're coming to authenticate a painting for us that night. I would like to be able to say to them, okay, fine, this is an emergency situation, you didn't do it, we will extend the consideration deadline, and, when you can come in and give us this piece of information, okay. And I think that's also semi-implied in our line that I saw here somewhere about we can hold over projects, if we don't want to recommend them in this funding cycle, we can move them to the next funding cycle. We can ask for more information. I think some flexibility is already inherited, and it doesn't do us any harm, as long as we don't start.
I'm of the opinion we should maintain as much flexibility for things like this.
Yeah,
Not kick out a good project because it was gonna be 2 days later before they could get some piece of
Yeah.
information.
Well, that's the other end of it, yes, but it's not in the beginning, to put the application in.
Oh,
There has to be, should be a time and date that we have to have the applications in. Now, what we do after that, that's number 13, we can, Article 13, we can revise, replace, amend, we have that flexibility
Okay.
to, make changes to, I mean, we don't even have a firm date for when we are going to be done with the projects.
Well, applications are due Thursday, correct?
Right, but after that, when we're just, the discussion, we have till February, March.
But if someone
February,
doesn't get
March.
us their application, a complete application on Thursday, that's cut off?
Is it Thursday or Friday?
It's the 30th, so I don't know if that's Thursday or Friday.
Friday.
I think it's Friday at noon,
Friday.
12:30.
but look, that'll be the
30th.
I don't know when to bring it.
I think what I'm hearing though, that it's less about someone saying, I would like the deadline extended for me, and more about once a project is already in play, there may be reasons to say,
Friday.
we're still working with the historic commission on determining something for eligibility. Can you please give us a 2-week extension while we're working with them, or working with a partner?
That's reasonable.
Like,
Yeah.
that would be
Well, that's-
reasonable.
I think, we know that there is gonna be some back and forth, even after yes, they need to submit something on the 30th, as much as they can, the full application, but since this is the first time we're all doing this, there will be back and forth, and even if it wasn't the first time, that's just the nature of, this type of negotiation, because, it might be that they say, well, this is what we'll do to satisfy the restriction, but then when it's presented to you, you might say, well, no, we want something better, or we want something else. So there's back and forth, which is actually, I have sort of a timeline I created with where you get a chance to ask questions of the applicants. And, so that's already built in there, the public comment period, the questions and so forth, so.
But at any rate, I think that Article 12 as it exists gives us enough flexibility and also the ability to say no if we feel that people are abusing the process.
I mean, I think that if they were missing one thing in the application that they can furnish, they probably would allow that and not say, no.
I don't know that,
Or because
I
it
don't
might
know
be
yes or
something
no, it's
that
mine,
could
I don't
be-
mean to say, no, that's not true, we wouldn't do that, I
Right.
don't know that, that's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
understand, what does this mean? Like, how rigid do we intend to be about these deadlines and about the completeness of the application? I prefer to be as flexible as possible with understanding the goal is to fund good projects, and if someone missed a form in their application, I wouldn't want that to prohibit the project from moving forward. I want maximum flexibility.
Right. And, I agree with that. Excuse me, and I think that when the time comes, if something comes up like that, something that unforeseen, we'll have a discussion.
We have it in our rules to
We'll
be
have
able
a
to have
discussion,
that
we'll talk
flexibility.
about it, and we'll decide whether we're gonna say okay or nay.
It'll be a case-by-case
Case by
basis. It's
case.
not a hard line in the
No,
sand,
no.
that you don't bring a complete application and on time,
Yeah.
you're out.
While we're on this topic, we had required that the applicants, submit hard copies of the application, but after talking to different CPA communities, it does seem like it would be a good idea to have an electronic version in the interest of transparency so that the public can see the application forms, but I'm not sure how to do that, so that wasn't what was initially written. So I'm just asking for your advice or guidance, like, do you think that it would be okay for me to request that, maybe not require, but request that they also send me a PDF of their applications?
I don't see a problem with that.
That's It's done all the time. I mean, that's kind of the.
No, I know, but it wasn't in our directions, it just said hard copies, so it's sort of like changing the rules of the application. So that's what I'm saying, I don't know if I can require it, but I would assume most people would be able to do
I
it.
think we can
Yeah, I don't see
request
a
that.
problem with asking.
Okay,
Sure.
Yeah.
okay. Good.
No problem at all.
Just scan them and turn them into a PDF.
Yeah, but there's it'll be hundreds of pages to scan, which will be a lot of work. Maybe you could help.
Yeah.
And do
We
people,
didn't want to try to make it a requirement this time because it was
Right,
not technically
because
a
it
rule.
wasn't
We
put
could make
in
it highly suggested.
right.
And if you were in a position where you needed us to turn it into a PDF.
Yeah, so I could
Use all the
email
soft
the
copies.
applicants and say, could you please also submit this as a PDF, and if not, we'll scan it. And also, do people feel that should be available on the website, that the application should be available for the public to see?
It's public
We have
record.
enough room. Do we have enough room?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right, I don't know.
Probably, I don't know.
I don't know how it works, but yes, the better, the more information, the better. That way, when they come in for the public hearings, they will have looked at the projects and.
I mean, otherwise people would have to come and make an appointment or something with me to see the application.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes
So-
sense.
Okay, good.
Did you already book this in?
No, we didn't.
Another, I don't know, concern might be overstating it, but the last sentence of the second paragraph, that the applications are preliminary review for completeness and statutory eligibility by the staff before being sent to the committee for review.
Well, that's
That's
just
me.
the initial, that's just the initial full application.
Right, for eligibility.
No, not for eligible, for
For
completeness.
statutory eligibility.
Okay,
So this,
Well, but it's,
I can take
that
out,
doesn't need to be that, that line doesn't need to be in there.
or I can take out statutory.
like I,
okay. They want to take out the whole line?
Does everybody want to take that line out?
Well,
Yeah,
let's
because
have to
that's
vote on
really-
that.
I would make a motion to strike that
Second.
this last sentence of the second paragraph.
Well, you don't want her to look at them and before she brings them to us, that,
No, I
to make
do,
sure
but
that
I
goes
don't,
to
but what my concern is, and again, I don't want to get too detailed about this, but if they're being reviewed for statutory eligibility by the staff before being sent to the committee, I want to, we might have a difference of opinion about whether
Okay.
something is eligible or not, and I think that's ultimately the committee's call with recommendation to staff. As long as all the applications that were coming in would be forwarded, then that's great. But my concern would be,
How about taking out just that word, the and statutory eligibility?
Yeah.
And then,
I actually have a somewhat different concern when I'm focusing on this, and that is, this, taking it out doesn't require us not to have
right,
our assistant check, do all of this work. But as long as we leave it in there, our rules say that we will do this. And what happens if, for instance, there's a time crunch and our administrative staff does not have the time to do it, and we
or if
actually
we've
need to do
expended
it?
our budget.
Yeah, or, no,
Right.
just, what if circumstances arise where it is impractical to ask our staff to do it, and they nevertheless need to be reviewed?
right.
If we don't have the sentence in there, we are not precluded by our own rules from going ahead and chipping in and doing it.
Right, but I think Amy should review every project application that comes in to see if there's anything missing that, and
Yeah.
she's
Yeah,
not
if there's some
making,
problem where,
she's not making any judgment on them, she's just
Yeah,
saying,
no.
listen, you need to add this in, you
I
forgot
agree.
this, you forgot, and before we get them, so that we don't have to do that, it's like a,
Yeah,
You
no,
know,
I'm in full support.
we both
Yeah.
agree, and I think there's no disagreement about that whatsoever. The
okay.
question is just about having it in our rules and therefore our being bound to the procedure in an emergency. That has nothing to do with my agreement that absolutely
suppose
this is
we
what we
could,
should be doing.
Oh, so in other words, if she wasn't available to be able to do that for
Right.
us,
Yeah.
it's in our rules?
We'd have to go to 13 and amend our rules to.
Yeah, it's just, see, just.
It just
do
seems,
that.
I don't see the real benefit of that.
Or we would just have to ignore our rules, which in
Right.
practical effect is what we would do. But seeing that not having the sentence there doesn't prevent us from
Doing it.
asking Amy to do all of the work anyway.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with whatever you want to do there. I mean, I think administrative staff, you could also just take out the staff, you know, the word staff, and, because you're able to do administrative work also. There are some CPA communities who don't hire anybody, and they do
Yeah,
it
I mean, we
themselves.
could say applications are preliminarily reviewed for completeness and statutory eligibility, as you say, before being sent to the committee for review. Although, if we're already reviewing them, there's some circularity to the sentence.
Yeah.
So what's your pleasure? What do you wanna do?
I'd just strike it.
Strike the sentence, we can always still do it.
Okay, so I have a motion for that? I think you did already, if you made the motion.
I'll make it again, a motion to strike the last sentence of the second paragraph from
Is there,
Article 12.
okay, is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so any other changes to that, Article 12 or 13? Okay, so do I,
Motion to adopt as amended.
as amended, yeah.
Second.
And any other discussion? Okay, all in favor for approving it as amended, okay, thank you. So we'll make those changes and then we'll send them out to the appropriate locations. And, you know, we should probably send it, email it to all of us, and we should probably
Okay.
print out a copy for ourselves to have,
Okay.
you know, just at home or bring to the meeting, just in case there's any questions of it, so. Okay,
Some questions that still remain would be still trying to figure out exactly how rigid we intend to be concerning the completion of an application, and just determining a sense of precedent within the community as we have all, or within the committee as we have applications. And also if the solicitor's office needs to look at this document and to what extent, given that there's new people in the solicitor's office. Yes? No?
I think we already have the approval
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
in principle.
Mhm.
And my sense of what we decided about flexibility is, you know, there's no controversy about the obvious point that if there's a sudden need, we can, for instance, open the funding cycle and take up a new project. And we're going to have to go case by case on,
Yeah,
once an
okay,
application
thank
is
you.
submitted,
Yeah.
what happens if a deadline is suddenly in peril. But I would think, you know, for me at least, the obvious analogy is filing a tax return. You know, you must either get the extension or file by April 15th. But if you have to open it up and amend the filing because you discovered that you missed something, unless something really egregious is going on, it still counts as you filed by April 15th, and nobody's going to come and try to go after you for not filing. And I would think, you know, for us, if you filed your project and we go over it, or Amy goes over it, there's one thing that really needs adjusting. You filed the project, you did the best you could, and, you know, unless it's clear that you were abusing the process by just giving us trash because you weren't ready yet, then my guess would be probably we'll say, yeah, go ahead and amend it. That is, of course, only me, but I see some nods around the table.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's pretty much what consensus. Okay, the next item on the agenda is regarding the full applications and update on their applicant communications. And Amy's had some, well, we've all had some discussions with the project applicants, but Amy, you must have some.
There's been no applications received yet. I checked with the city clerk's office. I have had conversations with different applicants, which I can give you an update on.
Sure.
I don't have to go, you tell me if I'm going into too much detail, but, so I met with the people from the Holyoke Boys and Girls Club, Eileen Kavanaugh, the executive director, and Connor Bevan, who works with her. And they asked me some questions, and I had to figure out the answers that I didn't know. So first one was, do their contractors need to follow Massachusetts prevailing wages law, which is, it's a lot higher than what the contractors might do normally, or what they would pay their employees. So what I found is the answer is complicated. but and I had some back and forth with Tasha Martin in the city solicitor's office. Every case is different, but basically we figured out, and from what she said, that basically in their case, no, because the city is not the project administrator and it's not a city-owned property. So even though it's being funded, through the city, we're not administering the project. But there are other cases where they will have to follow prevailing wages in other projects. So that was interesting. They also asked about the application, because there's a line in the application saying, are you applying for multi-year funding or multi-phase funding? And they wanted to know, can an applicant apply for a multi-year project with different phases? So for example, because in their eligibility they ask for less than this, but they really want to do a much bigger project, so I'm just throwing out this figure. Supposing they wanted $600,000 in CPA funding, can they ask for it to be dispensed in a 3-year project, for example, with $200,000 dispersed for each phase? Or she was asking, is it best that they just apply for the first phase and then reapply in coming funding, cycles and coming years for the next phases? So I consulted with Stuart Saginor about that, and he said there are 3 ways to do this. The applicant can apply 3 years in a row, each time for $200,000, and each application would require the committee's approval and the city council approval, or they can recommend. Or the committee can recommend the full, for example, $600,000 at the beginning, payable in 3 phases over the next 3 years. But to do this would be tricky, because you'd have to appropriate and encumber that full $600,000 in the first year. So you probably don't want to do that. And the third way, the CPC could recommend bonding the $600,000. Then you would work with the treasurer to set up a repayment schedule over as many years as you'd like. So I told her, she could choose how she, whether she wants to ask for just, say, the first part of the phase of the project or the whole overarching project. Just letting you know what I've learned. And she also wanted to know who signs the contract, the grant agreement. And I had other notes about this, but basically my understanding is that when it's not a city project or city-owned, it would be, the chair of the CPC, along with the mayor on behalf of the city and the city's law department. And maybe for projects administered by the city itself, like Office of Planning and Economic Development, I don't think the mayor would need to sign in that case, because it's a city department. Okay, so that's then. I also met with
Can I just interrupt for 1
sure,
second?
sorry.
So I talked with her today, with Eileen today,
Oh, okay.
and she raised the question with me beyond those 3 of the language in your letter to her about requiring a legally binding agreement for public access.
Right.
So
What did she ask you?
she asked me, what does that have to look like?
What is that?
What
Well,
does that
right, and
look
that's
like,
what
a
I came
legally
to
binding-
you about.
I know.
Yeah,
No,
and you
I
said
told
let
her,
them come up
I
with it.
told her
Yeah.
that. I said I took the heat. I said that was probably my idea, but in hindsight, it's not a good idea in this phase.
Right,
How would she possibly negotiate that type of an agreement by Friday to put in the application? So my recommendation to her, and I'm looking to the committee to give me some feedback, was for her to lay out perhaps just some general terms, like a term sheet of what an agreement would look like the key terms to it being that they understand that they need to provide public access to it, some definition of what public access is, and then also what happens if public access is no longer available. One of the examples was, what if a competing use comes up for that piece of property? Some great opportunity for the Boys Club, and now they want to dismantle the park that the CPA funds were used to pay for. What's a reasonable resolution of that conflict? So we talked about perhaps looking at a depreciating schedule of what, so if they did it the first year, if they got 200 grand for phase one, that they gave back 200 grand, but then maybe say it's a 20-year life of it, so it would kind of drop 10 grand a year down to, if they did it after 20 years, there's no penalty back. Now, I'm shooting from the hip, so I don't have any idea whether what I'm suggesting is legal or not. We're trying to problem solve,
Yeah,
but it's an issue, you know, like how do you public,
Madam Chairman, who is their legal counsel for the Boys Club?
they do have
I
somebody,
don't
but
know
I
the
don't know
answer
their
to
name.
that question. but
Why would that be the discussion between Eileen and her legal counsel?
Well, she was just looking for a little direction from the
Yeah,
community,
and
because
most-
it's,
right.
you know, the language in Amy's letter was like a legally binding
Yeah.
agreement, and it's like, that's a lot of work for
Right.
a lawyer to negotiate, you know, and it's also would be just proposed as one-sided, and there isn't, you know, it's not like a boilerplate agreement.
Yeah,
It's,
usually
you know,
there's back and
lease.
forth with that aspect of it.
So it's just my suggestion, and I want to know if I'm wrong, if the committee feels strongly in opposition to what I'm saying, I want to be able to go back to her in time and say, you have to get an agreement if that's what we think. But I said, you know, if you could just lay out what you think the key terms are and put in your application that a legal, before anything is funded, a legal.
Let their attorney make up those general
But,
terms, not us.
Can I
Yeah, no, I'm
just-
not making, I'm just saying, I'm just throwing out ideas with her, brainstorming with this.
Yeah, if her attorney wants to make it a general form for now, and then
Okay.
as we go on, develop it.
I just want to add that what I've learned from talking to other CPA communities is that they do it, they require a stricter, you know, deed restriction or whatever, if, depending on the amount of money they're worth. So if it's 10,000 and under, they might do it more of a good faith thing.
Yeah,
But if it's more money than that, they would pretty much follow the strict, they would adapt the perpetual deed restriction from, I think it's from MHC. So they would maybe make it less ornery or less strict, but use some of the same language.
that's what.
As, I think it's the MHC, Massachusetts.
Historic.
Oh, that's the historical, so it's a different one. There's another one for the state for open space or for recreational space. Maybe it's the CR. I forget, but,
The conservation restriction?
well, there's one for, yeah.
That we're not going to ask them to come up with a binding agreement by Friday. And I think what they need to know is that we will require something in front of this. And they need to decide how much restriction they're willing to live with in exchange for
Right,
that.
right, it would be a negotiation.
Yeah, it would be a negotiation. I'm inclined to think that something like a sliding schedule is probably not desirable from our point of view because it starts looking like a zero interest loan.
I mean, the thing is that, so what's it, you know, they're restoring an existing park, right?
Yeah,
So what the funds would be used would be that park restoration, which is gonna have some finite life. So it wasn't acquiring property that they were gonna use for recreation, not creating new space, which in that case, I could say, okay, that does make sense to have a deed restriction. I think my point, I think is, they need to, in their application,
Yeah.
state very clearly that they understand that there needs to be
yeah. And
an
then,
agreement, a legally binding agreement, but they're not going, but we won't kick their application out for not proposing a detailed agreement as part of their
Yeah.
application at this point. That's,
I agree.
Good idea.
Good.
because they may not get it, right? I mean, that's the thing, you could spend
Yeah,
$10,000
there's no way
on
they're
an
gonna
attorney
have that, ready.
and not get it, and have the boys have to spend 10 grand on.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Legal,
They
right.
need to decide what they're willing to do in light of what we're willing to do.
Right,
And
right, okay, they'll
Okay.
be relieved.
But they do need to, wait, as you
Right,
said, they
state.
need to know that this is going to be an issue for them.
Right.
Yeah, they could state that they will be
And then-
willing to sign.
Right, it's like any negotiation, right, okay, here's the grant, but it comes with these strings, and they may not want,
Yeah.
may not be worth it, and say, thank you, no thanks. Any of the applicants, right, are gonna have that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, okay, good, thank you, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's good, that's a good point. Okay, so I also had some back and forth with John Tansey of the Maple Street project. He's a private, put down home properties LLC in his business. And he was worried about the U.S. Secretary of the Interior standards for historic rehabilitation, and he thought that it wasn't required, but it absolutely is required for historic rehabilitation. But when I sent him what the standards actually say, he was a little less overwhelmed by it. But the issue really, which I'll discuss in another item, is who is going to oversee those standards, which is something I wanted to talk to you about. And also, okay, other projects, the Glowtech, is that how you pronounce it? Glowtech. I spoke to somebody there and they said they might buy the land with the city of Holyoke. And then the city, I can't remember if they said the city would hold the CR or if Kestrel would hold the CR.
Kestrel will have to see. it.
Okay, because it has to be a different, entity. And that's because the owner owes $87,000 in back taxes to the city, so I guess it would be better to do it this way and more ethical or something. So that's the update with them. And then Victory Theater, I spoke with Kathy McKean. She says, she was talking about how she just wants to be included in CPA funding. It's not that she just would like the project for the Victory Theater to get some money, so she can list the CPA as a funder, but she's not, greedy about it, or not thinking she needs all of it. It's not necessary. She has other sources of funding too. So she was trying to ask me how much she should ask for, which is hard to say. She can ask for as much as she wants, but I just was giving you,
Or as little.
her take on it, yeah. And I spoke with Sarah Myers-Zimber, I guess her name is, who works with Marcos at the Holyoke Redevelopment Authority, which I guess is another name for OPC, the Office of Planning and Economic Development, and she said that the Armory will probably be a joint application with One Holyoke CDC. So, and I think I spoke with somebody also from One Holyoke CDC just to go over things. And some people didn't really talk to me too much. We just sort of emailed, but I'll probably be hearing from them in the next couple of days. So that's the update on that.
Nice job.
Okay, good deal.
Okay, and you said we're gonna have a question about, you were gonna ask something about who's gonna oversee the.
Well, okay, so the next item is information from other CPA. Are we gonna go down the agenda?
Oh, yeah, okay, all right. Oh, so you wanna move on to the next item?
Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, so,
I'd like to speak up for a moment, only because I wasn't sure if this is the right thing or not, and if it's not, we'll talk about it later, but, I had the 43 Canal Street, the Flats Community Building.
Oh, yeah.
I had lots of questions about it. Like, the more I looked at it, the more I thought, what are they doing? It didn't seem to me to be in line with historical preservation, which I think it was.
and I did mention that to him about how you'll have to really back up that
So-
this is historic.
At what point we discussed that?
Well,
Because,
you all voted that it was eligible.
so eligible is fine, but does eligible mean they automatically get what they asked for?
Oh, no.
Absolutely not.
So at what point do we, because, I did enough, like, I've got some photographs, some aerial views, and I think, wow, what they want to do isn't at all
Oh,
bringing the building kind of back in line with the historic block that it was a part of. In fact, there's a question of the plaster kind of needs to go.
oh,
Unless they're going to say, we're not a part of this historic block and we're gonna do our own thing. So at what point, is that now, or is
I
that?
think when we
next?
get the application, because
I
they
see.
may decide not to apply, we'll see what they apply for and what they specifically propose to do.
I just, at some point, about, I don't know, a month ago, 10/17, I did all this research and found that it was not written up in Macris, it was not, didn't have historical
Yeah.
designation,
Yeah,
didn't have anything.
yeah, there are a lot of
Yeah.
question marks.
And then when you look at it, you think, wow, why don't they bring the building back to what it looked like, maybe from the outside? Because now it's an anomaly within this block of buildings, that, it might have been one whole building with demising walls, but,
Well, your research is useful, could come in handy.
so I'll just bring it up later on.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Okay, all right, good. Just
Absolutely.
asking, because I didn't want
Yeah.
So,
to have it, not share
is
it.
that what you emailed us earlier today?
Yes. But I was gonna get to that.
Okay, I just think it's helpful with that.
Later, but I could give it to you now, if you wanna take one.
Like, there is submit an application, we're gonna ask, we have
I'm not
opportunity to
up to
ask
talking
those
about
types
it.
of questions.
Yeah, and-
They'll come before us.
Yeah, and I actually spoke to Mike Moriarty, I think was his name.
Yeah,
and
yeah, that's
I-
it.
I tried to find as much.
But we haven't gotten to it.
Okay, I've heard about this project.
Okay, so should we go on to the next item?
Yeah, so what do you want to, you were
Oh,
up to
item
item 5?
five, yeah.
And we did the first one,
No,
the info from other CPA communities?
no, we didn't really, but I can see why you think that, because it kind of blends in. We did item 4, because that included an update on applicant communications.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so now we're up to item 5.
Thank you.
There's a lot.
Okay, all right, so
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay, so, I know that I've been in touch with Rosemary and Megan about talking to other CPA communities, and I don't know if you've had a chance, but I have spoken to, at this point, I spoke early on to Somerville, I've spoken to Great Barrington, as we know, I've spoken to someone in Northampton and Newton, and also I've spoken to Stuart Sagamore more. And one thing that came up when I spoke with the the Newton person, CPA person, is they said, that when I'm just like letting you know what I've learned, so you'll know this for the future, is that when it's a non-city applicant and it's not a non-city applicant, that it doesn't make sense to do a grant agreement with them, because our city solicitor represents us and also represents them, so it wouldn't really, work.
Oh, when it's a city,
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, she said, to have a grant agreement. You can't really have a legal grant agreement with a city project, like say, on the Office of Planning and Economic Development, because if they reneged or they didn't, follow up on their agreement, what are we gonna do? Sue them with our city solicitor that also represents them? So she was saying that she does grant agreement only with non-city projects. And actually, she said it can be difficult, and she said, so you get an appropriation, through the regular channels, through the recommendation that this committee would make to the city council for city projects, but there's no actual grant agreement. She was actually lamenting that it's very difficult to work with the city, sometimes because you can't really hold back, dispersing the funds and making sure that they do the projects. So the only thing you can do is document that they do, whether they do live up to their, what they're supposed to do with the money or not. 'Cause I guess she was saying that some projects she's dealt with, they just kind of take an endless amount of time to follow up. So that's been a problem. So I'm not sure what kind of agreement we would do when it's a city project. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so
We have been one.
if we.
Yeah, so, I don't,
They won't
yeah.
get any money again.
There you go, that's it.
but,
I trust them.
you see what I mean? We can't really have a grant agreement with them. But anyway, so I'm just letting you, tell you.
So do you know like how other cities have gone about it? Because how are we gonna be consistent with holding other people accountable that are not city? How are we gonna do that as a committee?
Well, when it's not city, you can.
Right.
They sign a
So
grant.
if it's city, we can't, so how is that gonna be consistent with our practices?
Well, you still have to do a written recommendation, it goes to the city council, you still have to approve it. But that's what I don't know, will they just get a bulk sum, based on what you approve?
Well, obviously, this is something we're gonna have to look into further,
Yes.
because we've had a number of projects before us that are connected to the city.
Right.
And I suspect that although we will not want to recommend that all of them get funding, I also suspect there's at least one where we will.
Yeah,
We need to figure out how
So-
we're gonna handle it.
Does anybody want to volunteer to look into that, or tell me who to contact to look into? I'm not really sure how we would go about it.
Ordinarily, my first thought would be, let's sit down with the city solicitor, but since at the moment we don't have a city solicitor.
Right,
um,
Uh,
maybe it's the city auditor?
No, it would be the city
It's
a
solicitor, we're just gonna have to wait
So
till they
there's
get
no
one.
treasurer?
So when they get a new one,
We'll have to wait till they.
There must,
they must have somebody.
there's gotta be assistant city solicitors, or no? There's nobody in the.
Yes, there are, we've been mentioning Tasha Martins, and there are, but they're very green.
And it might be worth checking
City
in with
solicitors
Alicia
typically are too.
Zola. Checking in with Alicia Zola.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, yeah,
And,
I will do that.
you know, she
I mean,
had-
a memorandum of understanding, some simple document that lays out,
we-
nothing that's, you're gonna be bringing into court to sue them over, but just to make sure everybody's on the same page.
It'd be
Yeah.
nice to
What you're
figure
up
out some way that things can be enforceable. You know,
Yes.
what Alicia does, it's relatively easy because she's got the force of federal law behind some of the grants she's administered.
Does she give grants to city departments, just the same way that the CPA will give them?
No, I don't think.
Well,
She
she,
did the grant that.
Yeah.
yeah,
What,
because
like what?
Yeah,
like
she
the
did our
down
initial
payment and
plan
closing
grant.
cost is administered to the Holy Housing Authority, you know,
Yeah,
so
but
she gives
that's not the
money
city.
to.
That's not the city. Now, I don't think there's any city
Like
departments.
inner city department
No.
agreement
Oh.
says
So,
okay.
yeah, I
So
don't
if-
think so.
the DPW doesn't empty the
But
trash
for
can at the
instance-
park department, the park doesn't sue them.
Right, I don't ever
You know what I
remember
mean?
seeing
Yeah.
that.
No.
No, not a city department.
Madam Chairman, unless, by way of a suggestion for the moment, if we just, in dealing with the city, we say, well, look, if it's 1/3 done, we'll give you 1/3 of the grant. When the next third is done, we'll give you 1/3 of the grant. When the final third is done, you'll get the rest of it. That's it.
Yeah, we can be flexible like that.
I mean, we can,
Mhm.
not that we don't
Pull
trust
the
you,
purse
but,
strings.
Yeah, right. It's not that we don't trust you, but-
Expenses, in
The most
fact,
powerful strings there are.
invoices submitted directly
Sure.
to us or something.
yeah.
Take the
Yeah.
city hall windows, you know, you pay restore bills the subcommittee from CPA up to X
Right.
amount.
Yeah.
So they would still
Third,
submit an
third, third.
invoice?
Right.
You're saying they would still
Do it.
submit?
It'd be
an
like a
invoice?
reimbursement.
I mean, this is
Yes,
just
yes.
very vague blue sky. at
All
this
of our-
point, but
all
we're
of
gonna have
our-
to just get creative with this, I
Right.
think.
Anytime we reimburse, it's gonna be after the fact, that they've already done the work. We're not giving any money ahead of time, that's
Right.
my understanding.
Yeah.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Good idea.
Of all the ones I've ever done, we always have to submit invoices,
Mhm.
or they do not pay.
Okay. All right, so can we move on?
Mhm.
Okay, so then the issue of the compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic rehabilitation, the committee needs to decide who will ensure compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic rehabilitation. And there are some possibilities that I've learned. I think this was from talking to Stuart Sagnor. It could be, for example, the Holyoke Historic Commission, but I've already kind of been in communication with Debbie and Alberman, and she said that the committee would have to request that, and, you know, it's a big responsibility. But it might make most sense for city-owned property. The other possibility is the committee itself oversees, but that, you know, would be a lot of work. And when I talk about this, I think I mean mostly, well, I was gonna say, non-city entities, but everything has to be overseen by the, has to comply with the Secretary of the Interior standards. Or the easiest way is to have an outside person, such as an architect, for that project. So it's, you know, built into their funding that they get awarded. So I think this sounds like this might be a good one, especially for non-city projects. So maybe, I guess my recommendation is that it would be great if the Holyoke Historic Commission would oversee the city-owned properties for compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards. But if it's a non-city property, that they would hire an architect that can submit a resume showing they have experience with this. For example, in Northampton, for the Academy of Music, they had a preservation architect on board, you know, who would, you know, probably on his resume or her resume could show that they had worked with a building on the state register before or something, so that they would ensure the standards.
Good idea.
And so for the Maple Street, for example, if that were to be awarded, they would get a preservation architect. They would have to hire with their funding, and they'd have to provide that resume.
That's a good idea.
And we could also just ask the Historic Commission how much work it's willing to take on.
What do you think about the idea of them being responsible for the city-owned projects?
Well, I think we can ask them about that too. I see no reason why they're a very competent group if they're willing to do the work.
Because they're also a group of volunteers, just like this group, so some are more involved than others, I think.
So, I mean, being an architect, that right away maybe perk up and think, if we get some of these projects that come in, wouldn't they hire an architect anyway? Many of these projects would require an architect. They would require a building permit.
Yeah, but I guess they would, but it would have to be a preservation architect, or somehow that person, there'd have to be somebody who has the experience to oversee.
So within a certain limit, I have some historic preservation experience, but I'm not an expert. We have one where I work, so I can certainly ask them to be a resource for us, but I definitely want to take a look at, like, do we just approve it and we don't see the project again until it's done? Or do we get to review, for instance, construction documents at design development and, 90% construction documents and, being able to comment, like, this is not what we talked about, like how do we maintain control over the scope of work to make sure that our funding goes to that work that we approve? Because some people might want to take the work and say, yeah, I don't know, working on these walls is more important than working on these windows, so, we approve work on the windows, and how do we make sure that they don't take the funding and do something else?
Well, they
Yeah.
can't take the funding.
They're not gonna get the money until
Right.
Yeah, but
someone
that how
else
that
it's not just, the
says
thing
this
is,
is, that
But
was the.
still,
if you look at the list of
I
what's
also think though,
included for the standards, some things can be interpreted in different ways, so it's complex, So it's not just, yes, they need to do what they say they're doing, but also is it in keeping with those standards? That's a whole job, making sure that it is,
yeah.
And
Also,
But that's-
realistically though, if somebody does say, okay, the walls are more important, we'll get to the windows later, spends the money, they've got this building, the economic health of the project demands the funding from us, or there's going to be a catastrophe. In terms of sheer political will, how likely do you think it is that we will be able to say, well, the hell with you, you didn't live up to your agreement with us, you're not seeing another penny for this? I mean, I would love to be able
A
to.
city-owned project?
I would love to be able to say that there is a chance that we would say, that's it, you're cut off, you didn't live up to the standards. But I think Marco is right, I think we need to ensure this on an ongoing basis, or we would at least be at risk of finding ourselves in a really awkward position if funds were misappropriated that way. There are too many people out there who are more willing to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission and follow the rules. On the other hand, this also may be something we need to build into the process.
And each one of you will be overseeing a project and working with them as they go along.
So that
Yes, so go ahead.
So that's what I've seen before in the past. I've done some work where, a lot of the work was just regular architectural work with a contractor, and we had weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings, and then there were portions of that work which were historically sensitive, which actually had an associate architect come in from another office with that kind of specialization. And that person would come in just for that portion of it. I don't know that all of this is going to be historically sensitive, but some of it is.
that's another option, is if there's enough money in the admin budget, to hire somebody who's an expert or some, to look it over, I don't know.
If we run into trouble, we'll have to consider it from time to time. I mean, we don't know if we're gonna need that or not yet at this point. so-
But you do have to figure out who's gonna oversee which route you wanna take for this. It is important to determine that,
Well, do the members of the other CPAs, do they have that kind of experience that they can?
What most of them them seem to be doing that I've spoken to is they have, it's built into the funding that that project has to hire a preservation architect.
Yeah,
Perfect.
yes,
Well,
that's,
Perfect.
That would be the way to go, because then you can point to that person and say, how come you installed vinyl windows instead of, the historically
But you're
correct
saying
wood
that you need
windows?
somebody else to oversee what the preservation architect is doing.
Well, if
No,
that person is an architect, a registered
Yeah,
architect,
the stamp he's throwing on it.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would know enough to say, why did you approve vinyl windows instead of, if it's something really major, I think you could probably object and take that somewhere, maybe with, the AIA or I think the historical architects also have a society that they belong to that they would have to answer to, or at least at some level.
So the only concern that I have about this conversation is that people have put together their budgets and are submitting applications in like 4 days. And they didn't build this, and my guess is they haven't built this into their budgets. So,
I think it probably is one of the list of things, how are you gonna ensure that it does say, how are you gonna ensure that you comply with the secretary?
okay, let's see what they propose.
But,
Let's go.
I definitely agree that it's gonna be a back and forth, and there might be people who don't understand
Maybe
that.
they've applied for 100,000, they need to apply for 105.
And I also emailed the applicants about this.
Exactly.
I emailed the applicants about this, and I sent them the standards, so.
Okay, good job.
Thanks. So basically you like what, the idea that I've
yes.
suggested?
Yes.
Okay. And what about the Holyoke Historic Commission requesting that they oversee the city-owned projects?
I think if they're, yeah, I
Now
mean,
that we have, or now that my mind has been focused more closely on the political problems involved, I'm thinking that maybe we need some more accountability there too. I mean, I know the historical commission will do its best, but I would think we at least need some project updates and ability to scream stop if things seem to be going really wrong. I'm not sure how to build
And
that.
they're gonna get funded after the work is complete, right? So if part of the process is.
I think it'll be in installments, right? They'll
As
be
they-
sending
Okay,
invoices.
so
You might have to
anytime
decide.
you wanna check, you have to submit something that's from a licensed architect that says this was done in compliance with the thing. Boom. Whether it's city or, because I don't think the historic commission has the
I don't know if they have expertise.
expertise to
Depends
play
on
that
who the
role.
person
Why
is.
would
Stamp on it. They're gonna put a
yeah,
stamp on it.
can we require the city to also have that? City projects, can we also ask them to
Same
have that?
thing, right? Certify it's done in compliance.
So we can
Show us,
just have the same rule for everyone, for every project.
it's
no
a
matter what.
design, right? Then they do it, and then it's an as-built. Boom, this is what we did, and it was done using these historically compliant.
People-
And if it wasn't, they don't get a check.
The only thing
Somebody
I-
has to check to see if we did it.
Well, the
That's
architect.
Yeah, the thing I would add to
Stamp
that
on
is there a process where, I guess some things, like if you're asphalting a playground, that's, I don't even know if you need a permit for that, but if you're, changing an elevation, adding windows, doing whatever that requires a building permit, they would need to create drawings for the building permit. Would we have an opportunity to look at their drawings and specifications and be able to, kind of look at what they're planning to do and at least verify that they're doing what we would like for them to do? And, there might be 10 tasks to do, but maybe we only funded 2 of those tasks. I would want to make sure that those 2 tasks were, like I go look and see the windows. What kind of windows are they? Are they, the right kind of windows, or are they, vinyl windows are probably not the appropriate window for most all,
This is it, we don't have, maybe you have that experience, but we wouldn't have that experience to be able to
So-
look at that. So that's why they're gonna have to hire someone who's gonna be able to tell us.
and then we receive some kind of report from them
Yes.
saying that.
Exactly.
And there's compliance with the building codes, but then there's the historical. I don't think we want to get involved in compliance with building codes, right? I mean, that's,
Well, that's what if it's a project that requires a building permit, The building inspector
Right.
will visit periodically,
Right.
make sure that everything's built
Right.
according to code.
Right.
The project architect should also, I think technically it says periodic site visits. It doesn't say every month or every
Right,
week,
right.
but the architect is responsible that all the code-related issues have been taken care of.
Right.
I don't know about historical architecture, but, you know, I've had somebody review work that I've done and said, oh, you should really use, you know, this product instead of that product in this case.
Well,
Will we get an opportunity to review the projects that we're funding at periodic, you know, at times?
These are all questions that you'll need to determine and tell me what you want to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm wondering too.
Well, yeah.
I'm wondering how much and like, do you want them to document each stage and when and what time and how many years do they have? So, yeah.
So,
So this is a question, it seems to me, that when you've been talking to other communities with some experience in this, and they came up with a suggestion which makes a lot of sense, that we ask applicants to hire a preservation architect to certify this. But what is their process like? Is it worth calling them back and saying, okay, once they've hired the architect, what does the actual completion of the process look like and how involved are you guys in the various stages?
Mhm.
Because that may be useful for us to know, rather than just batting us around in a vacuum.
And the other thing too is I would think that each project would have a project manager. They would have to hire someone, wouldn't they, to have, oversee the project, and that's who we are going to be in dialogue with about the project?
For those who could
It
contact
depends
you.
on the
I
project.
Yeah.
complex, I mean, I'm thinking about the cemetery up by, you know, by the Delaney house, where they're gonna fix 5 gravestones or something. I don't think they need, I mean, I think we want,
Right.
you know, so there's different
The
projects
ones
are
that
gonna have
he's talking
different.
about, that
Well,
we're
that's,
gonna
I
need
think,
to
the
do
answer,
that.
you know, it's gonna
Right.
be
It's gonna be-
project by project
Yeah.
based, and I think the more complicated the project is,
We're
the
gonna
more
have to
likely
ask for
there's
more
gonna
help,
be
exactly.
requirements for that.
But I definitely think that it's fine if like you say, oh, we need more information and we want to see your drawings, that would be totally within your authority to do that.
So I would suggest that we look at the drawings once before, you know, maybe the building permit set, and then, you know, maybe halfway between design and the building permit set. I mean, they're milestones that
You're gonna have to take a
architects,
look at them,
contractors.
because we'll look at
Yeah,
it
we
and
won't
say,
know.
okay, that looks good to me, I don't know.
So I could certainly do that. I hope
Yeah.
that, you know,
Right.
It
there's
does raise
always
kind of
somebody
a-
around who can do that. It would be good to know what other people do, whether they are critical
Yeah.
milestones that
Exactly, yeah.
I know in my business, there's, you know, there's schematic design, design development, construction document, like there are multiple steps before the project even goes out to bid.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't mind taking a look at 1 or 2 steps before it goes out to bid, and then maybe take a look at the set that it goes in for the building permit, because if you see what they're doing, you know, it's not right. That would be the time, not after the work is done and then requires removing or modifying stuff that's already been built.
Right.
And if you want to send me any information that you think would be useful for me to understand, like about this building permit process, that would be good.
Well, sure, well, if you, I know Chris Rembold in Great Barrington.
Yeah.
If he's a good
Yeah, he
person to
mentioned
ask,
you.
I could definitely call up and
Okay.
ask him what he's done with
Mhm.
more complicated projects that have,
He's great.
you know, like if it's it's a $3 or $4 million project and we're giving them $50,000 to do one part of it, did he just check on that one part? That's probably all he needed to do.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm. Yes.
on your schedule,
Oh,
I haven't gotten up to that.
10, which is grant agreements executed, so we're gonna negotiate agreements with each of the projects that are,
I haven't
recommended
gotten
for
up
fund.
to that one yet.
no, I know, but that's the, right, so all of these things are gonna be negotiated agreements, so put into
Yeah.
each one of these
Oh, I see.
projects, whatever level of supervision we want. We think they are warranted.
Conversation to be having, I think, because it seems to me we've basically focused so far on what are we doing in terms of allocating money, as opposed to thinking about how we're going to
Administrative.
handle the projects. It's as though we fall off a cliff once we make a decision to recommend to the city
Right.
council.
Right,
And, you know, do all right, can't do that.
right. That's, I think, a good research is what are,
Yeah.
maybe what do some of these communities agreements look like? Or the other communities grant agreements?
Oh, I do have some examples
Okay,
of that
good.
that I
So
got
that-
from Ms. Wemble.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And I don't know if I asked him though if he had any city-owned or city departments that applied, and if that was different, but that would be a good question for him too. City applicants, yeah. Okay, maybe I should skip some things here, but, one thing I mentioned to, Elaine is that, the Northampton CPA person, what they do is they have the Holyoke, their historic commission not only recommend, buildings that they believe are historically significant, but also say if they approve the work to be done. But we didn't really think about that in time, so, and that's a lot for this historic commission to do. So at this point, I guess what we did is I just say, keep it as it is, and if, you see that letter and you want more information, after you get the application, you say, well, we want to know if the historic commission thinks that this work is in keeping with, with his history of this building, then you can request that.
We can certainly invite them into our public hearings and meetings,
Yeah, I think that would be, and Debbie Opperman maybe should come.
Well, and the members, so they are, I don't know who all of them are, but I gather their chair has a certain amount of professional knowledge. And Paula Ferrario, who sits on the chair, is a Guggenheim awarded Paula Ferrario.
Uh-huh.
And she's a working artist with connections throughout the country. She knows a fair amount of history.
We have a representative of the Historic Commission on the committee, right?
It's me.
I thought it was.
Yeah, it's me, but I'm not on the historical commission.
Oh, you're
I'm on
not?
the Fairfield Avenue
Oh,
Global Historic.
okay, so that's where
So
the
that's where the disconnect
potential
is.
breakdown in communication.
Yeah.
So I've reached out to Richard Almstrom multiple times, and he doesn't even respond to my emails. Debbie Opperman, I go to her all the time, and she's very helpful.
Yeah.
Well, I will see if I can kick any of the rest of them in the ankles and get them over here for what it does.
Well, I'm actually planning, because I have some issues that I need to resolve regarding the local historical commission, I'm gonna attend their next historical commission meeting. I'm not required to attend them, I go every once in a while. But I am planning to attend the next one, and I can, relay a message, or I'm gonna ask if I can speak at that meeting on one topic, but I could maybe extend it to a second topic if I need to. And I can ask them if they have any interest, or what their procedure is for,
This is all new for them too,
I guess, because I did ask him about the, the flats community building, and he didn't get back to me. I was gonna ask what their level of interest was in that building, if it appeared on any of the historical documentation, because I couldn't find it anywhere, on any planning plan or any.
They need to recognize that you're their representative here.
So I can do
And
that.
they should be reaching out to you for,
Well, I
how's
give
it
them
going
reports
over
every
there?
meeting.
Right.
I write notes because I give them notes from every meeting that I
You
do,
do.
this meeting.
Well,
Because I wanted to make sure it was as transparent as possible, but I can ask them, are there specific questions, or do you want me to just
no, I mean,
broach the subject and make sure that they understand that?
That they have to be a partner with us.
Yeah, all right, I can do that.
To what extent they want
they appointed you as their representative on this committee, right?
Yeah, I mean, I volunteered,
Well,
but
yeah,
nobody else stepped forward, sorry.
But they still, they did.
The historic commission appointment.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so officially, I guess different people are appointed from different committees or
Right.
commissions, I think it did say one from the historical commission.
Yes, it's right,
So I played that role in Hadley, but I was on the historical commission, and then I was their representative on this. So every historical commission meeting from that point on, there was an agenda item. I gave them an update on what was going on. And they were very interested, so
So I'll approach Richard, I think he's the right person still, and I'll ask him to, if I can have a moment in front of the commission.
Okay, great.
Okay,
That would be great.
Okay, so then, all right. I'll just mention briefly, because this is discussed in the next item, that Northampton CPA recommended that I create a timeline for the application review process, just to, with specific deadlines to kind of make sure we get things done on time. But, that's item 6. And another thing I learned is that from speaking with the city solicitor, Tasha Martin, and again, lots of back and forth, the question of sales tax, that we won't be reimbursing for sales tax, she says. So, well, so in some cases, if it's a city project, they'll have a tax exempt form they can use. If it's the Holyoke Boys and Girls Club, they should have, as a nonprofit, they should have that. But for other projects, the city, according to Tasha Martin, doesn't reimburse for sales tax. You look shocked.
I am. That the city doesn't, but the CPA funds are, what are other communities doing? They're reimbursing
Well,
sales tax?
I was told by, I think it was the Northampton one, I'm not sure which one, she warned me that we'll get in trouble with the auditor if we do that, and that we can't do that. But then again, you know what? When I spoke with Stuart, he said that might be something to do with just that CPA. So it may be something that isn't really clearly defined in the CPA law. So I'm a little bit vague on it, because the person who told me said, no, don't do that, absolutely, your auditor will be very, upset. But Stuart Saginaw, so it might be like that we have to check with the procurement.
I would check with the auditor.
It wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, I work for a public school and we are not allowed to reimburse for sales tax for any reason.
Check with the
Yeah,
auditor.
That's a school department policy?
It's a
So
state
our
law.
auditor left.
Oh, okay.
Like if you're a state, if you're related to the state, you are not allowed to reimburse for sales tax. You have to use your tax exempt status. If someone that works underneath you does not, choose to use that, then that's on them. They do not get reimbursed for sales tax.
Okay.
We have to make sure the project applicants know that. So we don't have an auditor right now, right?
Yes.
They left.
No, we don't have a
Elder
solicitor.
left?
I thought Bellamy is leaving.
I don't know.
Well, there was a party, a going away party.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's gone.
He's gone too
Yeah,
now?
Bellamy's gone.
So we don't have an auditor?
Right,
There's an intern, I'm pretty sure. I was trying to track down.
yeah, so a lot of good people are gone. All right.
They
So,
still should be able to answer your question if the auditor's not there. They have an office where there's people that work there and they should probably.
That's a general rule with taxpayer dollars, though. You can't reimburse sales
Okay.
tax. Federal
so you
government, too.
think that, yeah, well, that's what the city solicitor thought. Okay, so then the next thing on item 5, sorry, there's a lot. Maybe this isn't such a bad, I was worried about administrative oversight, since there was a limited amount of money for for my salary. And I was gonna recommend that when you review the applications, that you might consider limiting the number of projects you approve if there's a limit to my hours. Because overseeing many projects, even if they're for small amounts of money, is going to be more hours of work. So, but if there is more money in the budget, maybe it will be okay, but I
I'm just
just wanted to
thinking,
make sure you consider.
if we build it into their proposal, it's not coming out of our administrative budget, it's coming out of the awarded budget for historical open space that pays for administrative, that might be a loophole.
No, well, they can't, I think that any work that I do with, like, figuring out grant agreements, meeting with the applicants, and answering questions, all that, that's administrative, that's out of the
Have
administrative.
you heard that from any other communities, though? Because it seems very tight, our administrative budget. I mean,
Well,
are
that's
other
tight
people running
because-
into
I think
these
it's
problems?
tight because you spent it on a lot of other,
Yeah, a lot of things came in this
Over
year
the
that were
years.
supposed to be
It's
in
still
last
very
year's.
small dollars, it was like $10,000.
No, 5,000, yeah, okay.
I mean,
so
once we have projects going, it's gonna be much busier than it has been in the last 18
Right.
months.
I don't think that you can give funding to a project with money to pay for my
For
work.
your piece, right? It would
No,
have to be
yeah.
a separate administrative
Oh, yeah,
oversight.
that's definitely, yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted you to keep that in mind, but I guess you're telling me that there's more money in the administrative budget, but just keep in mind, like, what's really practical. 'Cause even if you can't fund as many projects as you would like, you can still encourage the applicant for next funding cycle or whatever, when there is more money in the administrative budget. So, unless, you know, the members of this committee wanna get more involved, you know, in overseeing projects. Because, for example, with like site visits and things like that, when it's a non-city thing, it would be important to really go check out and see that the work is being done as it's supposed to be, so. And just like what I've been telling you, that there's no head city solicitor right now, so there's a lot of things that are difficult to figure out and take more time to figure out. And every project is unique and demands a lot of legal work and negotiation.
Madam Chairman, Amy, to have a site visit, we would have to be allowed by the owner of the building or the site, on site. They would have to allow us to give legal permission for me to go to the City Hall Annex to look at the glass, if you will, because that's really their
You mean the
building.
forum?
Or the City Hall, or any place. To go onto a site, you have to get permission from the people that own the building or run the building to be there, number one. Number two, if we were there and we got hurt, who is liable? Us or anybody, if it goes on, if you go onto a construction site, is it written in the agreement that we're covered?
Oh, that's a good question.
If anybody, if I trip, hit my head on the floor, who's liable? Do I have to pay for it, or these kinds of things? I'm just wondering if that, if those things should be considered.
You'll be issued a hard hat.
Yeah. But
No, that's, all right, no, that's good to know.
But
I mean,
all construction sites have insurance behind them.
well, does it specifically say that we, because we're not the electrical inspector, we're not the plumbing inspector,
But
we're not any
But we're
inspector.
the funding,
No, we're on the funding, but
we're the
that
funding
means,
mechanism, so they need us.
but as long as it's said in the agreement that we're allowed, we will allow a representative of the CPC access to the site for an overview, as long as we put that in our agreement, and that if they get hurt, who's liable?
Well, if it's a city project, the
Depends.
city, and if it's
Well,
not a
that's what I
city
mean,
project,
so we have to be kind of careful.
Yeah.
Or ought we to say to the electrical inspector, the plumbing inspector, or Mike McManus, can you do the site visit to make sure those light fixtures for the
But then you're
mysterious-
trusting the applicant to oversee one project.
No, what I'm saying is if we contacted, for example,
Oh.
the Wisteria Hearst Museum, they want to put up, say for
Oh,
example, they
I see
want to
what
put up period lights. Okay, we'll call the electrical inspector, can you go up there and look at it and see that it's installed correctly and it meets your electrical, the National Electrical Code, just for example. We'll let them do it, say, yeah, they're doing
would
it
have to
correctly.
do that.
You're right.
They would have to do that anyway.
I know, but then it takes us off, it's off our plate.
Right.
I'm not sure how much of a problem that is, in that planning board and conservation commission at least have a right to ask for site visits when we have projects in front of us. And I have never had anybody raise an eyebrow about either giving permission or.
No, that's fine,
or-
as long as it's written in the agreement.
Well, except-
No, it doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to be, you're a city agency, for planning board. If we ask for a site visit and the project applicant says, sure, you're invited on such and such a day, no one has ever
You can't
suggested.
just,
that's
you
fine.
can't just go there.
That's fine.
You set up an appointment.
Oh, correct, that's what I
My
mean.
suggestion is that as a city committee, we are in exactly the same position as the Conservation Commission would be. If we say, anywhere in our agreements, with, you will allow for us to make site visits by mutual arrangement.
Correct.
I would suggest that then we don't have to worry about the insurance provisions, because their insurance should cover any liability.
Yeah.
And invited representative of the city somehow gets in trouble.
If that's the understanding and that's the procedures in history, yeah, you're right, then that's what we'll do in the agreement.
Yeah.
That if we give you the money, we're gonna tell you
Just-
beforehand.
Yeah, I'm making the assumption that there's no liability problem simply because neither I nor anybody I know who has served on any of the relevant commissions has ever mentioned that there might be a liability problem about going onto a site.
Well, I
Maybe I'm making a
usually,
reasonable assumption, but,
well, I'm just saying, if I'm the contractor,
oh yeah,
And
no,
I'm
you
in charge of
expect
the site.
an arrangement.
and this guy gets hurt, even though it's expected or non-expected, does my insurance that my company carries cover that guy?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, does the contractor know that?
If you're invited onto the site and you have a meeting to actually
And you
meet
have
someone, then
permission
you are.
prior to that?
Yeah.
So it's incumbent upon the fellow who's running
Who's
the
ever
job
doing the work.
to have insurance to cover site visits
Yes.
by
Yeah.
anybody. That's
Mhm.
It's
legitimate,
been invited.
that's been imparted. Okay, no, as long as that's the procedure.
Okay.
Okay, and just, I think that we'll probably need to, the committee will probably have to have more meetings, like at least twice a month. Anyway, on to the next thing, the CPA signage, this is still under item 5. This is not required, so in other words, signs like banners saying this is a CPA funded project, a lot of CPA communities do this, you know, obviously it's a good, seems like a good idea, but it's not required. But it's a good idea for PR purposes, and it lets people know where their money is going, so that they'll be supportive of it, of CPA. And there are different ways of doing this. One way is to buy a sort of stockpile of signs using administrative money, but if we're low on that, we may not want to do that. Another way is to buy more permanent signs and take the money from the project budget, so the project itself would, some of their money that they get would go towards that. The only issue with that is that it would be hard to make the signs uniform, because every project might do a different sign, so it'll be kind of willy-nilly that way. So I had the idea that we could use the project money for temporary signs, but the CPC would determine, and so that the committee could make them uniform. The only annoyance would be that we would need to order new signs for each project, rather than circulating the same signs, because it would come out of their project money.
If I could just make a suggestion, in light of the fact that we've had a whole lot of political controversy in the last month and a half over signage in Holyoke, the sign ordinance and temporary signs, perhaps we should defer this until at least the city council and ordinance committee have sent out the orders to re-examine our sign ordinance, which I expected.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah.
But that's like political signs, right?
No,
Signs.
it's every temporary sign.
It's just for, it's weird.
It
So-
was,
We could print them on cloth
There's-
banners.
Yeah, I
Does
would
not
do-
fall underneath the
Yeah.
temporary.
Oh,
We
well,
could
yeah,
just
this
get a
could be
banner
banner,
at first,
cloth
you know,
banners.
until we
well,
have money.
depending on how it is affixed.
Yes.
This could be
This
called.
We need a
is-
nice-
Yes.
Stand there.
Long
Each guy
story
take 3
about
hours apiece.
temporary signs.
So any
No, I
project,
think it is a great publicity tool, and I think it is definitely worth pursuing. I just suggest that we might want to wait a while before we make any
Okay,
decisions about it.
okay, but it's good to know that cloth banners are okay, because I did send, I think I sent you all a link where you could see the different communities, how they do it differently.
Yeah. But other kinds of signs may be just as good, if only we wait a little.
Okay.
And I think that Councilor Lisi has filed an order to revisit the entire Holyoke sign ordinance, and not just temporary signs.
Do you know when we'll find out what the ruling is?
This may be a long
About 10
process, but, you know, we will at least, you know, I would expect that the order will be referred to ordinance, and we should hear within a few weeks when they're gonna start taking it up over.
It's gonna be tricky, because we probably would want in the agreement, you know, for these applicants to say that they will agree to put some signage up.
We can tell
Maybe.
them, or we can ask them to agree to signage that will be reviewed at the appropriate time, which is a thing that happens in site plan review, actually. You know, we not infrequently have a provision in a site plan approval that says, you're going to come back to us with a sign package and we will approve that at the appropriate time.
Okay, so they agree to the idea of signage, and we'll let them know later what that will
Yeah.
be. All right.
the other thing is that any project of a certain importance or size has a job sign, and it's part of the specifications, and the owner can ask that certain things be included. That's the one by the entry gate that has like, you know, like big signboard that has the name of the project, and then the architect, the contractor, where the funding comes from. And we could probably get a line on that sign as well,
Oh,
because I see funding on there all the time.
I was on a sign that they already had.
Yeah, it's part of that's why I said of any size or significance, because smaller projects won't do it, but any kind of medium-sized project, the contractor's obligated to put the sign out. So they put their name, the owner's name, usually the architect, and sometimes consultants, sometimes the name of the bank that did the funding. So I think we could easily ask them to include us on the sign, the project signboard.
Yeah, there are currently signs that regulate just how much, there are regulations about how much verbiage you can put on the temporary construction signs at the moment, but that is likely to come under review too, so.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so the next item, sorry, do you want to
Okay, the next item is item 6, the CPA application review schedule.
Yeah, so this is what I sent you all, and, because, now, the person I spoke to, she does they do 3 or 4 different funding cycles, but she, so they really have to be very on target, but she said, I said, is there anything you could recommend to us as a new CPA that would really be helpful to know? And she said having, fixed deadlines, having these set deadlines, to make sure that, by the spring.
Stay on task.
Yeah. So I looked at, how much time they allowed between different things, and I also looked at when you want, when the grant agreement should be executed by the spring, and kind of made these dates if I looked at my calendar. So I know this is a lot all at once, so if you want to look it over, and I don't know if this requires a vote for next time, or,
I did have one question I wanted to ask, a thing to throw in front of the group, which is our time for meeting with applicants. We've got basically 2 days here. I mean, it may just be meant as a deadline rather than as a series of hearing dates. And, obviously some of these proposals are going to be much less complex than others. But my experience of site plan review is that you're lucky if a simple site plan review can be done in half an hour with preliminary work by staff already factored in. A complicated one will take many hours. And if we have 11, 12, 20 of these to get through, I think it's going to take a lot of hearing time.
which number are you talking about? Are you talking about?
I'm talking about 5. I would expect that by 5A, if we're lucky, a lot of the initial questions will have been worked through and it can be done more expeditiously. But I am concerned about the sheer amount of time, even with preliminary asking and answering questions, it's going to take to get through all of these. And I have no answers for that. I just wanted to throw it out there and suggest that people think about it, about how we want to approach it.
Also, I hope,
I'm away those days.
Well, then those are not good days to do this.
as you can see, there's different steps that have been added in here, like 4A is the CPC members submit questions for applicants. So the way I imagine this is that you can email me your questions, I would compile it into one document, I would forward it to the right people, and they then give, they would know that they need to reply by this deadline with their answers via email. But yeah, I see what you mean about the meetings.
Well, the analogy again, and I do think this will be simpler than site plan review, but people come in with a project, and the staff here does all of that. They review the project, they ask questions, they assemble them into multiple rounds of getting the answers done. And the planning board typically doesn't even look at a project until a lot of that work is done. And nevertheless, you're lucky if it is an in and out, 15-minute, half-an-hour meeting. Something complicated, and if the public shows up and asks questions, which we can't prevent, it can be a long evening.
Well, I think these dates are
Yeah.
they're there, and
They're
we
there.
have to stay within, it's
Yeah.
not that, these aren't written in stone,
Yeah.
we can just,
But my point, such as it is only that I I think that we ought to be prepared for at least a few weeks where we may be here a lot. Maybe we'll get lucky and we don't have to be, but we may have many hours of meetings to be done in that January, February window, just because of the number of people who are submitting.
Do you think that it would be best to have sort of consecutive meetings or like a couple meetings per week? What do you think would be good?
We'll probably know better actually by Friday when we know whether people are actually
Yeah.
submitting. or not.
That's true.
Maybe we'll get lucky and only a few submissions will come in. But if even 2/3 of the people who put in preliminary applications apply, you know, I suppose it depends on everybody's schedule and how clear we are by the time we've compiled everybody's questions and answers. We're just gonna have to guesstimate,
But we'll probably need more dates.
but we probably need more dates.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if 2 evenings will do it.
It does continue on the back, just so
Yeah.
you can see. Which of these dates are absolutely set in stone? Like, is it when the award letters need to be, or when the CPC has to submit the final recommendation? Is that,
None of these are written in stone,
okay.
none of them.
Not, okay, I thought that it had to be done by the spring.
No,
Okay.
they're just
Oh.
recommendations and, you know,
Okay.
we're going to try to pick those dates.
So it could even go
Yes,
into
we
the summer?
can.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
this
like,
was,
we don't want to go past July 1st,
yeah,
because
this
we
was
start a new year.
calculated
Yeah.
backward
Oh,
in the
okay.
hope that we would be able to get this, our first set of recommendations moved through city council before they break for the long vacation.
Yes.
But even that is a self-imposed deadline.
Mhm.
And we were trying to keep this as fast as possible because the more time the city council has with it, probably the better off we'll be. But that's the only constraint on this, and that is a self-imposed constraint.
The more time the city council has. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you satisfied with that answer there, or?
Okay, so are you okay, basically, all right, so these are not fixed,
Yeah.
but we're okay with it?
Yeah. I think we're
All right.
good.
Okay, so we can go on to item,
Item 7, okay, I'm not sure, Libby, if, I don't know, the last we had talked about the Facebook page, you weren't sure how we were gonna be out. Do you have a Facebook page or something?
Yeah, we do.
And we have
We've been
it.
having it.
Oh, see,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
last meeting, we
We've had
didn't
it.
know, we didn't know,
I've
okay,
had it for a little bit, and Amy, the administrator, spoke
Okay.
about that, so
okay.
she
So what
was
is it
set on
called,
us.
what is it under?
It's under
Not too
Community
bad.
Preservation, yep, Act Committee, Holyoke, Mass. So if you look for it on the Community Preservation, you can find it online, and you can become a friend.
Okay,
So
great.
everybody at least, you know, on committee here should
do
be
we
friends.
have likes or whatever?
Oh, yeah, Amy has been putting some fantastic pictures. She took out the armory picture, which was great, because the armory is in the run, right? So we didn't want people to think like we were favoritizing the
Yeah.
armory, so,
But I was just wondering, do people have, do you see how many people have joined
Yeah.
the page?
yeah,
Is that-
well,
I was just
we
curious.
have likes, like, every time, like, right here, you put, I invited, like, a whole bunch of people to,
Oh, I guess it doesn't show you.
it doesn't show, but, like, it says every time 30 people reach, non-engagement,
Yeah.
people come and they say little things. I look at the inbox and the notification part to see if we have to respond back to someone, but there's really not that much activity. Right now, the last post was posted by Amy on November 7th, and it's talking about the update of all the applicants who submitted, and it's a link. However, I just noticed today that I tried the link, and when I go onto the link, I get this error.
Oh, that's
So if
weird.
you can
Okay.
check, there
Yeah,
could be
I'll
like
look at
6 different,
Okay.
you know, things that are going on,
that.
but
Okay.
besides that, I mean, we changed pictures, I posted like things that are deemed appropriate, like, this was posted by Amy with the, another update that the first round of eligibility, that was on October 22nd, and, you know, we have different photos that were submitted throughout the
And
city.
I'm just realizing that I should also have a link on the website to the Facebook page.
Right, we don't have that, but we do have a link on the Facebook page to the website.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's weird that that's
Beautiful.
what we did last
Yes,
time.
it is.
I also wanna add that, I met with, I
97 people follow us.
97 people follow us? Okay, nice.
Alright.
Oh, that's good.
98.
So you went on it, you're a friend now? But it's pretty nice, you know?
I've
It looks
also updated the Holyoke website, the Holyoke CPA website, because I had to do this for the Holyoke, the City of Holyoke website, because our page was weird and didn't, look, it wasn't formatted like the other pages and wasn't easy to find, so I met with Eileen Cooler, who does the website.
Hallelujah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
finally, and she is working on it, and I had to sort of summarize the content, you know, to put on there, so I now put that on the homepage for our specific website as well.
So, okay, so what would happen before, when I went on the city's website and I would go into our page, it would take me to our website. That's what it was doing.
Yeah, you never showed me what you were doing.
Well, can you do that?
Sure.
Okay, just go to,
Yeah.
just go to Holyoke.org. And then. Okay, go to government. Okay, down to, oops, down below, down there. Government and Holyoke, boards and commissions.
Yeah.
Here,
I can't see.
other governments.
Boards and commissions, yeah, under,
Oh, right here, upon,
Yes. Click on
appointed
that.
officials. Okay.
Then go to CPC, ours.
This is the old one though. She's gonna take this one.
Yeah, it takes us to our website.
It takes us to our
Oh, I
website.
never saw that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Takes
it's,
us,
But there is still a page also on there that she's working on.
oh, I don't know about that.
But that's just gonna be under departments.
So is that okay though, that it goes
Yeah,
to
that's
our
good.
Yeah,
website?
That's
that's
what you
great.
want.
That's
I
what we
think that's
want.
good, actually.
That's all right, I didn't know if that's what you guys wanted or not, so.
I have a question though about the website, because you know, I post news and things like that. Should I be posting information on the state match and on our budget on the website?
Yeah. All right.
So why not?
So the full budget, not just for this year, like.
It's up to whatever Andrew wants to give you.
Well, I mean,
Should I? I don't know.
think that at least the
Maybe
state
not.
match is like a little fun.
I think our annual approved budget is transparent, but when we get into like the expenses, that's tough. Because
Right.
it changes so frequently.
The
And I wouldn't
annual-
be able to keep it up probably. So the annual approved budget, so we can have the 18 approved budget,
Okay.
the 19 one that we just shared here. As far as the actual books go,
And also the state match, okay.
and yeah.
So I could put that on the website, all right.
Yeah, if you, this what I sent you today, I mean, that's got it all right there for this
Okay,
year,
so I
right?
could just, maybe I could link to that as a PDF or something.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
Okay, great.
assuming the council approves.
Yeah.
Right, that's the thing.
I don't have to wait for council to approve it to put that on there, or?
I would wait till
Okay,
they approve it,
wait.
but we can put the 18 one on there.
Yeah, the 18th. That was fairly simple.
Okay. All right, we're up to other business.
Okay, the timesheet thing about Brian, he only has submitted one timesheet to me so far for a couple of hours. And I don't know what's going on. I wanted him to be here tonight so we could talk to him about it, and
I think he's with city council.
I know, but I think they're done. He's done.
So that makes it tough for us forecasting the administrative budget. I'll try to reach out to him personally and ask him.
Yeah, I asked him, to check with, he didn't know whether he should put it all in a lump sum, or do one timesheet. And I said, no, you should do every week that since July 1st, you need to do every week.
That's the
a
only way to
timesheet.
manage the budget, is if we're tracking it over time.
Exactly, so I asked them to do that and then submit that to me, but I haven't gotten it, so I don't know.
Okay.
So just
Hopefully
for
it's not too big of a
information's
head.
sake, yeah, just for information's sake, hopefully we can get that straightened out, because it needs to be updated, and just like the minutes. Okay, The other business, if anybody has any other business that we need
Did,
to discuss?
Rosemary, did you get to talk to the other CPAs at all?
I did not, I have a call for Jay Linsky from Westville, he's tough to get.
I told Amherst, but I haven't heard back.
Yeah. I'm gonna leave another, I'll leave one
Yeah.
more, two more this week. I'll keep trying.
Okay, anything else? If
Well,
not-
there's always more, but I know this meeting's already very long, so.
Well, that's what we should discuss on our next meeting. Date.
And maybe have more than one per month, is my suggestion.
Well, yeah, we'll have to, you know, increase our meetings as time goes on here more
Yeah.
with all our project business that we're gonna have. So,
And the projects go to the city clerk?
City clerk.
So we'll have all of our projects by Friday at noon.
Yeah,
Probably have
12:30.
a quick meeting after that to review what we actually have, what we're working with.
Yeah.
Do we have a Google Drive that things can be uploaded?
We have a Google Drive, right?
I have, well, I've shared things with you on Google Drive.
Right, because I remember when, what was the name of the woman that did our, Elaine,
oh, I'm
that
sorry.
group, the class group, was it?
The
What was the name of the woman that worked with us on our,
The website?
no, not the website, our first, Roberta, right?
Oh,
Didn't she have like a Google Drive for us that we
Yes.
were, okay.
Yeah.
So I think there's one that exists already with.
Oh, well, I
us.
never communicated with Roberta, so
Oh, okay.
you have to send that to me.
Because if all the applications are uploaded to the same Google Drive,
Right.
like, everyone can just
Easy.
log into the Google Drive and see what's there.
Yeah.
Does everybody have Google Drive? I know I didn't use it till I had Gmail.
Right.
I don't know how
Do
you
you have
get it if you don't
I
have
remember,
Gmail.
I think, no, that you didn't have it.
No, I don't even know what it is.
You have to get a Gmail account, and then you can have Google Drive.
It's a huge pain, but it works.
It
Yeah,
works,
it's not hard to
Nice.
get, it's not hard to
No.
get an
Free.
email from.
And yeah, it's great.
Just go to Google and ask for email and they'll take you right there, just pick an address that you want and,
Well, what I do is for people who don't have Google, I think Mimi, you don't.
No, I have it, I just dislike it intensely.
Okay,
because-
so a couple of people, when I try to share something, it'll say that, you know, they're not on Google, so then it gives me an option to just add your email or something.
oh, thank you.
It does not play nicely with my security settings.
The nice thing about Google Drive is it's a virtual filing cabinet.
Right.
So
Yeah.
everyone can open the file cabinet and look at the same folders.
And we can see like if there's changes, and it tells you the last person that was in there, so it's like a nice tracker. Just, you'll love it. Once you start using it, I know that
Well,
it's like a pain, but you know that it's
yeah,
good.
but no, but it works, and I'm
works.
not objecting to using it.
Okay.
So we're talking about when we'll meet next week, right?
Well, okay, so, right, the week starts December 3rd and I already have a meeting December 3rd Monday night, but you guys can meet if you want, and Michael can,
December
Okay.
3rd's not really good for me.
Well, Monday is gonna be early, because we get the things on Friday, and people will want some time to look at them.
Oh, that's a very good point.
so.
Yeah, how am I gonna get them to you? Because they're all hard I have to give them to you physically. So I have to meet just to give you the copy.
Well, this is why I'm wondering why, if it's possible, instead to upload them to a Google Drive.
But they're not electronic, as we talked
No,
about
no.
before, unless they will all
Well,
get.
they may not all, but let's get the ones that we can.
Upload them to a Google Drive.
Yeah, the ones I can certainly share with you Google Drive, but that was not in the original directions, so, but
Right.
hopefully that'll be easy enough for people to do. If not, I need to have you.
I have a problem, a conflict the first 2 weeks in December, so, my daughter's coming in from Oregon with her family, so I'm not gonna be
That's
available.
Tis the season, that's gonna
I
start
know.
happening a lot,
Yeah.
Exactly,
Everybody.
exactly.
so.
So I don't know what you wanna do.
Pick a
then.
date, whoever shows up.
Well, it's Tuesday, I mean, what would be an appropriate Tuesdays for the month of December? Having a Tuesday instead of a Monday? Does that make it any
No,
easier for
no,
anybody?
she's
I
out
think
all
it's
next
easy
week,
for
she's
me.
got,
17th would work.
Well, yes, I would be available either the 17th or 18th, if you wanna wait that long. You wanna wait that long for our next meeting?
Well, people will need time to look over
I
the.
would agree.
But how are people going to actually get, if I don't get all the applications electronically, which I may not, we need to meet just so that you can get copies, or you need to pick them
Well,
up?
when they're ready, when you're ready, pick, that Wednesday, the next Wednesday afternoon that you're gonna be in the office, tell people to stop in and pick them up.
That gives us time.
Or can we just get an email of what applications have been submitted sometimes?
Yeah, I can definitely do
And
that,
then we can,
and
then
send
you
you
can
anything
coordinate.
I have that's electronic. And then maybe on Wednesday the 5th, if there are any that are only exist as hard copies, you can come get them then in the office. How's that?
Send us an email.
So December
The
17th or
17th, I can
That's
schedule
what
these
she
early,
said.
as long as they're not 6 o'clock.
We'll make sure when I'm on
Yeah,
December
there might be
17th.
many that
Might only get
need
four.
to-
I work in school.
I know.
Oh,
What?
I work in school. I can scan a 100-page PDF document in about a minute and a half.
Wow.
You just put it in the tablet copier and it scans.
Uh-huh.
And it just puts all of it through and then emails it to you.
Well, that would be wonderful.
Madam Chair,
Like, it's,
Yes,
we
it's
can
our
do that.
next meeting, the
Okay,
17th.
so maybe we
It's
can
already
connect,
Like, we can do that.
okay.
maybe we can connect that week or whatever, or on Friday to, I'll let you know which ones need to be scanned. For sure.
Okay. All right, great. So, 17th or 18th, what's your pleasure? I mean, what?
17th.
When is that's the Monday night.
For me, I'm voting 17th, but I can,
I generally like Tuesdays better, but whatever.
if I can do the 18th too, it doesn't matter to me.
It doesn't matter.
I don't know, I have trouble with the Tuesdays
Whichever
because
people,
they
whatever
are
your-
sometimes planning board meetings.
No problem, I can do Monday.
Whatever.
I prefer the 18th.
I'm flexible, I can do either day.
We're not timed out that far.
What's the
This
pleasure?
planning board meeting is on Tuesday.
So the 17th, if you want it, Monday. That
Or
works.
if you want to go for the 18th, I can just wait and see whether we actually
Well,
have a meeting.
Right.
Sometimes we don't.
Okay.
Whatever.
Well, we know
Or
for
we
a
can
fact
do
that 17th is good for everybody, is
Yeah.
that correct? The
I can
17th
do the
good for everybody?
17th, yeah.
Okay, well, let's make it the 17th.
But in January, I won't be able to meet on Mondays.
It's okay.
Okay,
Cross
so
that
we're
bridge when
meeting
we
at
come
6.
to it.
Yeah, 17th at 6, yeah.
At this location, at the sport board.
We don't know.
We'll find out from the city council. what
Do we want to set another meeting also for December?
We can't, because then next week is Christmas after that.
Oh.
And then,
But then by the 26th, the CPC is supposed to submit questions. Okay, I guess I can still
26th
do
of
that.
what?
December 26th, that's what I put down here.
Okay, well, that's.
good luck
yeah.
with that one.
Well, that might be a little bit, yeah, we might not be able to do that. We might not be able to do that till after the 1st.
Well, if we have a list of the applicants
Yes.
next week, we can start to
Right.
divvy that
Yeah.
out.
The other
Right.
thing is, if we have a list of the applicants and we know what the applications look like, we could do a quick look around by email if we feel that we need to schedule another meeting,
Right.
not with another day.
Yeah.
Our next meeting should be right after the 1st of January.
Right.
To, be able, if we, we really have to have, if there's any questions or anything, we have to really get those answered before that beginning January meeting. So that when we meet in right away in the beginning of January, we'll be ready to really start deliberating and
Yahoo.
getting ready and setting up meetings with these people.
Okay, when's New Year's Day?
I don't know.
Tuesday's January 1st.
What did you ask?
New Year's
You wanna read
Day,
that?
New Year's Day is a Monday,
It's a Monday, okay.
so we could meet the 2nd.
Tuesdays.
You want to meet
Second?
January 2nd? Some people might be out of town.
Right.
Well, okay, so
Does that happen?
then we're running
Let's
into.
decide on the 17th.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, okay.
At 6 p.m. right on the 17th.
January?
We
Yes.
have a motion
No, not
to
January,
adjourn
December.
So
Right.
moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
from the hallway. All the votes are aye.
Oh, the fight's free.
Okay.
They don't want to do it.
These are all spaces in next year.